Are we ready? All right, so folks, we'd like to welcome Johanna. She's here to introduce herself and do a talk about her work today. So let's kick this off.
Thank you. So I'm supposed to introduce myself. My name is Johanna Hedva. I'm from LA. Sounds like all I should say. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then my hope is that we can have like a discussion with everyone, and feel free to comment and talk and interject and ask questions as you see fit. But my text is pretty short, so I'm just going to read it from this borrowed iPhone. I'm sorry if I'm going to look down for a while, but that's what's going to happen. Okay, so today I want to start by quoting from a text that was written by some friends of mine, Park MacArthur and Constantina Zabatsanos. Their text is called Other Forms of Conviviality, the best and least of which is our daily care, and the host of which is our collaborative work. So I have 3 quotes that I want to frame my intention for this time that we have together. The first one is a bit long. Okay, quote. Gestures of intimate inclusion are regularly used to make violence appear as equitable exchange. Given that care work has historically been a site of violence done to both domestic workers and those who depend upon care, can we find other convivial forms for this labor that do not depend on exchange? The second one is, what if we approach care as an event? And the last one is in the form of a score, and it goes like this. Share my feelings. Ask someone to share their feelings with you. So I've been invited to speak at this conference because earlier this year a text of mine sparked and caught the air and started to burn into the stratosphere. It was called Sick Woman Theory and is the first chapter of a book that I'm working on. The second chapter is being published next Tuesday in a magazine called Guts. So I'm going to just read from the very end of Sick Woman Theory in case you don't know of it, just to give you an idea of where I kind of ended up in that work. So I'm going to quote myself. I used to think that the most anti-capitalist gestures left had to do with love, particularly love poetry. To write a love poem and give it to the one you desired seemed to me a radical resistance. But now I see I was wrong. The most anti-capitalist protest is to care for another and to care for yourself, to take on the historically feminized and therefore invisible practice of nursing, nurturing, caring, to take seriously each other's vulnerability and fragility and precarity, and to support it, honor it, and empower it, to protect each other, to enact and practice community, a radical kinship, an interdependent sociality, a politics of care. Because once we are all ill and confined to the bed, sharing our stories of therapies and comforts, forming support groups, bearing witness to each other's traumas, prioritizing the care and love of our sick, pained, expensive, sensitive, fantastic bodies, and there is no one left to go to work, perhaps then finally capitalism will screech to its much-needed, long overdue, and motherfucking glorious halt. End quote. So the reaction that my work has had is overwhelming to me, I have to just be honest. Mainly because I'm moved that it's had the resonance it has had. It's been translated into 3 languages. A 4th is in the works, and it's been uniquely viewed more than 100,000 times. This is no small feat for a 6,000-word essay in 2016. It makes me feel humbled, grateful, and joyous. But as time goes on, there's something else about this reaction that started to feel unsettling for me. After the first few weeks of people reaching out to me to tell me how much the essay resonated with them, I started to wonder, why is it that so many people felt an articulation with a text that tries to work through how violently uncaring and oppressive our society is? and how the institutional mechanisms that construct illness, weakness, vulnerability, and disability are so internalized at this point that all of us struggle to do simple things like take care of ourselves and take care of each other, especially when there is a need for care. A lot of the time we don't even know what to say to someone who is ill or whose fragility has been made visible. The Lyft driver who picked me up at JFK last night, when I told him why I was in New York and what I was going to be talking about today, waved a hospital bill in front of my face. His roommate had had to go to the ER because of a panic attack. He had his blood pressure taken and a prescription written, and the bill that came was for $1,137. So in Sick Woman Theory, I propose that the neoliberal, colonial imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, cis-hetero patriarchy has constructed illness and vulnerability as a rarity. That is, our ideology has created wellness, health, and especially ability as the norm, the default. And this in turn creates the needing of help, the requiring of care, the reality that all of us are vulnerable, fragile, and always dependent. All of these become constructed as temporary and as problems to be solved. What is so dangerous about this configuration is that it allows care to be conceived as temporary also, as an aberration to the norm. So when requiring care is considered only necessary sometimes, then care will only be available sometimes. We can see how this is playing out right now on a state level. Think of the residents of Flint, the events that have sparked Black Lives Matter, which is only the newest incarnation of a struggle that to me defines American politics. Think of the violence against queer, trans, and gender nonconforming people, the near 100% certainty, for example, that violence will await a Black trans woman if she goes out of her house. We can also see how this plays out in individual bodies, in our own fragilities, in our feeling depleted just by having to wake up and go to work. For those of us with chronic illnesses like me, for those of us who are poor like me, for those of us who are not normatively well or normative at all like me, we feel it every day. And these questions about what is radical, what is progressive, often leave a lot of us behind. Fred Moten was my mentor in developing the first two chapters of this project in a fellowship I did in LA. Fred pointed out to me that the etymological root for the words privilege and private is the same. It's from the Latin privis, which means simply individual. So that an individual can have privilege is also the extent to which such an individual can be private. It's why white people don't know what white supremacy is, or that they benefit from it. Whiteness itself is a kind of totalizing assumption toward privacy. As Fred said to me, privilege is a radical incapacity for sociality. So going back to the quotes from Tina and Park at the beginning of this talk, I want to pose some questions. What are ways that we can care for each other and ourselves that are not based on an individual's capacity or their privilege, their privacy? What are ways to manifest care as an event? The score says to share your feelings and then ask someone else to share theirs. So I'd like to share that today I'm feeling particularly emotional, permeable, fragile, and haunted. I'm starting to think that this feeling is important political work. To reckon with being haunted is to bear witness, to honor, to celebrate, to excavate, to give voice, to exercise, and to recognize how we have come to where we are now, collectively, interdependently, in relationship with and to. I think it's always important for me to say that I am not a representative of any specific kind of experience. I am presentative of it. That is, I'm doing it right now in front of you and in front of myself, and I'm here to learn and to listen and to grow. For me, Sick Woman Theory is a starting point. It's an invitation to begin. I started with some words that had found their way into the soil where I was standing: sickness, womanness, weakness. even though I didn't really identify with any of those things. So I want to invite dialogue and stories and knowledges to come into my world. So in this sense, sick woman theory is radically incomplete and messy, and my way of working through a disordered reality. So that's how I feel. I'd like to use the rest of the time to ask you all how you are feeling, what you are feeling, what are you thinking about, what are your dreams telling you, what are you carrying in your bodies that the medical industrial complex hasn't been able to name yet. And please, everyone, feel free to respond to something if it comes up. You can address questions or comments to me, but you can also address it to the room. I thank you for listening. And I think we have like 15 minutes for a discussion now. Thank you.
So, do anyone have any questions?
Or just things they want to say?
You don't have to.
Or you could talk to me afterward if you don't want to say it in front of everyone. Yay.
I have a question about what you think about the thoughts that I'm having. So I recently had a conversation with a friend who essentially, like 10 years older than me, but we're in the same place in our lives and just not really understanding what, like, if everyone had like a few keywords that describe what we do and what we're great at, like we don't really have these keywords. And like how to make this not having these keywords something that we're really good at, in terms of like doing different things or helping other people accomplish what they want to do. And at the end of this conversation, we were like, oh, maybe it's like because we're women, and even though we don't necessarily want to have children, we're like mentally preparing to have the children. And in this way, sort of like opening ourselves up to different kinds of interactions. And I was curious what you think about that, if in terms of it being like a vulnerability or a strength.
Well, also, if anyone else feels like they have something to respond with, please do. The first thing that just comes to my mind is that lately I've been feeling really antagonistic to the words strength and weakness. I think that this is a totally fucked up binary. A lot of the time when you're ill or when you're perceived as being marginalized or something, or you're struggling or you're coming from a legacy of oppression or trauma, people say to you things like, stay strong. And it's like, first of all, what do you think we've all been doing this whole time? And then also do I only get to do that? Is that the only thing that I have to do in order to be taken seriously or to be respected, is if I'm strong or exhibiting strength? So I really like the idea, instead of strength and weakness being a kind of standard that we measure ourselves against, I like vulnerability and resilience much more. I mean, I think that vulnerability is the norm. And we're conditioned to believe that it's like a flaw and an innate responsibility to maintain, first of all. And then also, like, if you don't have it, there's something deficient in you, you know? Or a keyword, you said?
Like being good at a thing is like the strength that you have, and being distracted and fragmented is like your weakness.
I guess I wonder about like what you feel like your true desire is. To desire like what you like, what you want, what you enjoy, rather than like what your capabilities are, and how those things are measured as like some sort of like I am confident in this way. Like because I
directly connected to like digital social media, but just more like why do I live on this earth if I like this? Like that sort of question.
I'm curious if anybody in the room had a specific story that came to mind when you talked about use the quote of care the event. I never thought of it in that way, and so I'm just
That's
curious.
so Constantina Zavitsanos and Park MacArthur being geniuses. Just like shout out to them if you know their work or anything.
So I'm just curious when you inside of times like care as events that sort of when you heard that. An example.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is that the word caregiver and caretaker mean the same thing.
Oh, wow.
And I've really been thinking about how I am in relationship to my support group and my friends for so many basic things that I need just to be able to function. Like, I mean, some of my support group is here right now, and they know that, like, sometimes I can't get out of bed without their help. And so there's something to me, there's a lot of talk right now in trauma recovery around self-care. And one of my favorite thinkers right now is Catherine McKittrick. And she just tweeted, a few months ago, she was like, I'm sorry, self-care sounds really colonial to me. Like, if I'm gonna heal, it's gonna be in relationship with and with we're gonna do this together. It's not just like my own self being the standard around everything. And the other thing that I'm kind of antagonistic to in these narratives of healing is this idea of regaining self-mastery or self-possession. Like that book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is this best-selling trauma recovery book, literally says what we need to worry about is getting people back to being masters of their own ship. And I'm like, whoa, did nobody on that editorial staff just stop and think about using the word master in the same sentence as ship? Especially when you're talking about trauma and this idea of self-possession being an ideology of what you can own. And I think that that's a wrong-headed way to think about how we can be liberated and fulfilled and joyous in our bodies and embrace our vulnerabilities and that kind of thing. So for me, when I think about care as an event, it's a way of kind of reframing that